Summer's End, Episode 2 The Salted Pig's Foot. I grew up in the village of Querceta in northern Tuscany. It's an area known as Versilia, nestled between the Mediterranean and the Apuan Alps, where the best marble in the world is mined, and a thriving community of foreign artists formed. People come from all over the world for that marble, my parents among them, and even though I was raised far from any other blood relations, I had a large and colorful extended family. My father worked in the marble studio 2 blocks away from our house. Because of our proximity, there was hardly ever a day when we didn't have an unexpected visitor for at least one meal. It was a time of excitement, of art. I grew up crawling around the feet of nude models, toddling through marble yards, climbing olive trees at harvest time, and learning snippets of a dozen different languages. Divna and I were born just a couple months apart, Divna to a Serbian family, and I to 2 Americans. We are among a very small handful of children born to the foreign community in that generation. In the summers of our infancy, our mothers would bicycle to the beach together with us on our bike seats, staring at the world. By the time we moved up to sitting behind our mothers, we insisted on trying to hold hands all the way from Pietrasanta to the beach, some 2 kilometers away. Needless to say, that didn't happen, but I can still hazily remember reaching out my hand to her and seeing her fingers extended towards mine in return. Summers at the beach are an integral part of the culture of my corner of Italy. Kids grow up running naked in the sand until they get old enough to need bathing suits. By then, we were allowed to wander aimlessly, as long as we didn't go past the pier in one direction and the last of the seemingly endless rows of beach clubs in the other. Our colors were green and white, and I remember swimming out to the buoys, skin stinging from an encounter with a less than happy jellyfish, and watching as our little green and white umbrellas bobbed and swayed, as though we were actually still, and they the ones floating. Divna and her family moved back to Serbia in 2nd grade, and lived through a war. But every 9 months, they were back in Italy, to pick up more stone, and to spend the summer at the beach. She had 3 brothers in fairly quick succession, and with the addition of the 2 sons of the other family that shared our shade tent, we were a right little pack. I learned to do handstands in the pool and built strip castles in the sand. We played hundreds of games of pinacola until our 2 decks of cards became worn and soft. The lizards learned to avoid the area around our tent, for I took delight in chasing them, and sometimes setting, to my young mind, elaborate traps for their capture. Every day, around 3 p.m., one of our mothers would pull out a snack for everyone. Slavica, Divna's mother, made home-baked bread, rich with eggs, and with a particular flavor I have never been able to imitate, but that I sometimes crave with a relentless, yearning hunger, especially on hot summer days. Elena, the only Italian mother in the group, would bring nespole from her tree. They are an odd fruit, known as loquats to the English-speaking world, that I've never personally encountered outside of Italy. A sort of apricot-like peach, the size of a small plum, with 3 smooth seeds and bright orange flesh. They ripen and spoil very quickly, so when it's nespole season, you eat a lot of them. My mother would bring watermelon, or occasionally a baked good, but everyone brought cantaloupe. A good, fully ripe cantaloupe tastes a little like pumpkin, a little like candy, and a lot like summer. It should be so juicy that your chin is dripping, and when eaten on a beach, that means sand sticks to your hands and your chin when you try to brush the drops away. We would lounge around, full and sleepy as the heat of the day came and went, and the required hour after eating passed, then run down to the sea. We had to run because the sand would get so hot our feet would burn. We would dart from shadow to shadow until we reached the tide line and salt water would cool off our overheated souls for a few last steps before we threw ourselves into the water. As dusk approached, the beach clubs closed, and we would all trudge to the bike shed, tired and hungry, but in that good way that only comes with fresh air and play. My mother and I would go in one direction, and I would wave to Divna, both now graduated to our own bikes as we rode towards home, the taste of cantaloupe still lingering on the back of my tongue. Or maybe it was just a taste of summer, settling in for the cool of night. Cantaloupe was just one of the flavors that colored my childhood in Italy. Like any child born in the Mediterranean, my taste buds run on extra virgin olive oil, on sea salt, on ripe fruit, and fresh-picked herbs. You cannot live in Italy and not love food. The Italians love to talk about it, only slightly less than they enjoy eating it. It is how they show regional pride, and how they celebrate every occasion, from getting up in the morning, to their daughter's wedding, or great-aunt's funeral. That love passed from the Italians, to my parents, to me. The love, but not the flavors. My parents were living as expats. They had given up their homes and families for the artist's way of life, but while they gladly gave up mortgages and McDonald's and accepted, if begrudgingly, the poverty and hard work, there were a few things they could not let go of from their country of origin. Favorite foods are hard to abandon. For my father, it's spicy Mexican and maple syrup on his pancakes. He also has a fondness for root beer floats, which he would always make for me on the 4th of July, despite the fact that root beer has never grown on my un-American palate, and that we were in Italy, where I really didn't understand what we were celebrating. My mother loves baked goods and Asian food, or at least the mighty hippie stir-fry. While her peanut butter cookies, brownies, and banana bread were a hit among our Italian friends, the soy sauce and tofu simply caused confusion, to them and to me. The artists loved it, though. We would smuggle tortillas, maple syrup, and bottles of soy sauce in from the US, and portion them out with care. Even today, when I buy it in bulk, I only drizzle the minimum possible amount of maple on my French toast or pancakes, the instinct to make it stretch so deeply embedded that I cannot shake it except by supreme force of will. Because of their love for ethnic food, my house never smelled like those of my schoolmates. When the work at the studio stopped for the day, and my father and his fellow sculptors tromped in through the door, shedding marble dust from their clothes and beards, it was a coin toss as to whether we were going to have enchiladas or pasta. Our house's first floor was one big room, which, for simplicity's sake, we called the big room. The big room was kitchen, dining room, living room, and pantry combined. There was hardly any space, and what little there was crammed with books, art supplies, and a single large comfy chair. The table was a slab of red and black granite, salvaged from a scrap pile and placed on a sturdy base. It fit 3 people comfortably, but more often than not 8 or more crammed around it, eating off our mismatched china. Food and wine flowed, and laughter would pour out our little windows, dancing across the pots of basil and pink geraniums on the sill. Laughter is a language all its own, one every artist in Pietrasanta was fluent in, even when their Italian or English was choppy or nearly non-existent. My mother can make anyone laugh. She is beautiful in a genuine, free-flowing way that draws every eye in the room. Her hair, graying since my earliest memory, is long and wispy. It surrounds her face and falls down her back in thick curls that billow as though possessed of a life all their own. Much like fingers of light in a dusty room, it imbues my mother with an almost ethereal glow, but it is her smile that truly brightens and shines. It starts at the bridge of her nose. Her eyebrows rise up, lines of worry smoothing away. Her lips curl at the corners, and it is like the opening of a window on the first day of spring. Her whole face just breaks into joy, a wave of infectious mirth expanding to draw in anyone in her presence. I remember falling asleep, just a floor above, hearing that familiar laughter muffled by stone, and smiling too, because if she was laughing, all was well in the world. It was Christmas. My mother is Jewish, more cultural than religious, but on the high holidays and in moments of fierce emotion, it comes pouring out of her in a rush. We were one of only 2 Jewish families in town, and it never felt so lonely as on Christmas. Down in the street, the church bells would ring, and the town would congregate in prayer and song. We celebrated a secular winter holiday, complete with shining tree and presents, and for most of the year, I was proud of that, proud of my atheist father, of my parents' decision to raise me with Star Wars, not God. On Christmas, though, I've always felt empty and ever so sad. I remember staring out my steamy bedroom window down at the cold, windswept street, watching my neighbors dressed in their best suits and dresses, coats turned up against the cold, and feeling more foreign, more alien, than at any other time of year. My father painted the scenery for the holiday reenactments at the church each winter. He carved the altar for the church in Vaiana, and was good friends with several priests. They accepted him as a friend, not a believer, an artist, not part of their flock, and every once in a while they would drink together and tell stories. When I was born, the church, knowing my parents struggled financially, turned up with a giant basket of baby clothes, food, and diapers. Every year thereafter, my father gave back to the community by painting murals or building floats. He gave them hours and hours of his time because most artists have time, not money. Of course, instead of paying him for his work as he would have preferred, the community banded together and brought the box. I was 4 or 5 at the time, and the box no longer contained supplies to raise a child. Instead, it boasted an odd assortment of holiday foods donated and bought by our neighbors and clergy. One year, we got a whole smoked salmon from Norway. Another, we got a Toblerone bar the size of a loaf of French bread, along with the requisite panettone and fruitcake. That year, we got the salted pig's foot. It was tucked into the bottom of the box, next to a jar of jam and behind the nougaty torrone and big jar of Nutella. It was vacuum sealed in a clear, decorative box with a red ribbon. A holiday tradition dating back who knows how long and surreptitiously falling to the wayside as the modern Italian palate changed to mirror a more well-off part of history. The foot was about 16 inches long, hoof and all, and a pale beige color that looked altogether unappealing. My mother stared at it in revulsion and slowly shoved it back in the box, taking the panettone instead to make French toast out of. Some days later, when the box was finally dismantled, the pig's foot was shoved into the back of the cupboard and forgotten. The seasons changed, and it was spring, then summer. Fall swept in after that, and Christmas followed. The box, thankfully, was much tamer that winter, and on Christmas Eve, or a few days before, my parents bundled me up into our Renault 4 and trundled up the mountainside to a holiday party. Having forgotten a gift for her best friend, my mother, in a fit of inspired mirth and cruel humor, snatched the pig's foot on her way out the door. All parties among the expats were similar. Lots of wine, soda for the kids, a rare treat, good food, which almost always was a mismatch of potluck items from all over the world, and music ranging from the Buena Vista Social Club to the Beatles to Edith Piaf. This one was at Robin and Stefania's. Their house is still one of the most stunningly beautiful places I have ever seen. It is at the top of the most preposterously curvy and narrow driveway, overlooking a hillside of olive trees. There are trees on their land as old as the Catholic Church, and if that doesn't humble you, nothing will. The floors are marble, and marble is cold. The amazing hosts that they are, Robin and Stefania, have a chest right in front of the door filled with slippers. Every guest was invited to take off their muddy shoes and pick out a pair of slippers for the evening. I remember skating around the smooth marble on mine in the company of their 2 daughters, playing Let's Pretend and laughing. The main room of the house is 2 stories tall, with an internal balcony opening it to the 2nd floor hallway. The hearth in the mixed kitchen and dining room is made of ancient stone, surrounded by thick beams of polished wood, the last remaining pieces of the house that had been on the land before they built over it. Stefania is a joyous Italian woman who married a Canadian artist. She speaks fluent English with a thick accent and dyes her hair a rich auburn red. I have always been amazed by the food she cooks. I watched her even as a child and still do not know how she does it. It seems so simple, just a pile of potatoes and vegetables from the market, olive oil, some rosemary, a crushed clove of garlic or 2, a smile. Despite years of attempts, I still haven't been able to recreate any of the meals she seemed to so effortlessly conjure. Dinner that night, like every night I remember there, was a loud, warm, delicious affair. Herbs hung from the ceiling near the pantry, and everyone gathered around the long wood table. My father had made coconut cake, a favorite, but by the time we got to dessert, I was so stuffed I could only manage 1 slice. As the dishes were cleared away, presents started being handed out and opened. Most were art. Artists, as a whole, are money poor and masterpiece rich. Gifts of art never went unappreciated, and all of us had little galleries in our homes. When it got to my mother, though, she just handed the hastily wrapped parcel over to Neil, a grin on her face. She and Neil had been friends from day 1. Another Jewish kid from the States, they got each other's humor in a way that others never quite did. Neil, who I call uncle to this day, was, at the time, but not for much longer, a cheerful bachelor and a near-permanent fixture in our house. He knew my mother well enough that he knew she was up to something as she waxed poetic about how precious and from the heart his gift was. He did not see the pig's foot coming. The whole table laughed, and the 2 of them nearly cried with mirth at the absurdity of her gifting something like that, or of Neil using it. He made a big show of thanking her, however, and I could already see the mischief forming in his eyes. Thus, a tradition was started. Every year at Christmas, some poor soul was getting the foot. It passed around and around, occasionally popping up for birthdays or other celebrations, but never missing a Christmas. The Italians wouldn't have understood. They would have given it to their grandmother, who would have boiled it and served it on Christmas Eve. The expats had all left their grandmothers behind. They had chosen their art over their families. Italy, with all its maddening bureaucracy, crazy drivers, and catcalling men, over the life they had been raised to. They lived in cheap, drafty apartments, in falling-down castle towers, in lofts above their studios. They worked long days without any guarantee of a paycheck at the end. Only their insatiable need to create made such insanity worth it. Artists are, and always have been, apart. Wherever I go in the world, I always know I'm home when I walk into a house and see an easel. The smell of oil paint, of wood dust, of solder and wax are, to me, what to many others is the aroma of Grandma's cooking. When I'm homesick for Italy, all I have to do is walk into an art supply store. I've been stopped by many clerks asking why I was crying in front of the pastel sticks. How could I explain that to me, they are the touchstones of a community that doesn't exist anymore? There are still artists living in Pietrasanta, but when I was 10 years old, the studio, the hub of our existence, closed. An era had come to an end, and the salted pig's foot, too, finally found its resting place. Christina, apparently, loved it and made a wonderful meal. New artists came, young and excited. New studios opened, and Pietrasanta continued to be one of the great art towns in Italy. Our life there, though, was drawing to an end. Soon, we would be packing up. We would leave the granite table and the geraniums on the sill and the long bike rides from the beach on summer nights. It was slipping away, and I was growing up.